I woke up at 2:17 a.m. on March 14th, with my heart racing and my hands shaking, and I knew with absolute certainty that my twin brother was dying. I could feel it in my bones, in my blood, in some place deeper than logic. And when I grabbed my phone, I saw 17 missed calls from base camp in Pakistan, and a text that said, "David, we lost contact with Alex 36 hours ago. Avalanche on K2 search called off, presumed dead." But I knew he was not dead because I could still feel him. And that feeling, that twin connection that everyone thinks is superstition, was screaming that I had hours, maybe minutes, to do something impossible. Land a plane at 25,000 feet on the second highest mountain on Earth and find my brother before the cold or the altitude or the lack of oxygen killed him. My name is David Chen. I am 38 years old. I am a high-altitude rescue pilot, and my twin brother Alex is a professional mountaineer, and we have been connected since birth. Connected in ways that doctors cannot explain. Ways that sound crazy when you say them out loud, but every twin knows what I'm talking about. We feel each other's pain. We know when something is wrong. We have woken up at the same moment from the same nightmare 1,000 miles apart, and 2 days ago, that connection saved his life. Because when everyone else had given up, when the rescue teams had called off the search, when our parents were planning a funeral, I knew he was alive, and I flew into the death zone to prove it. Alex and I were born 4 minutes apart. I came first, he came second, and our mother used to joke that I spent those 4 minutes trying to figure out how to get back to him, because from the moment we could crawl, we were inseparable. We developed our own language before we learned English. We felt each other's emotions. We knew when the other was hurt or scared or happy, even when we were in different rooms, different cities, different countries, and everyone said it was cute when we were kids. But as we got older, people stopped believing. They said it was coincidence or confirmation bias or twin mythology. But it was real, and we both knew it. When we were 12, I broke my arm falling off my bike, and Alex, who was at a friend's house 3 miles away, started screaming and holding his left arm, the same arm I broke. And when they brought him to the hospital, he kept saying, "David is hurt. David needs help." And the doctors said it was sympathy pain or psychological, but Alex knew exactly which arm, exactly where the break was, before anyone told him. And that was when our parents stopped dismissing it and started documenting it, because it kept happening over and over throughout our lives. We went to different colleges. I went to flight school, and Alex went to study geology and mountaineering, and we were 1,000 miles apart, but the connection never weakened. I would wake up in the middle of the night, knowing Alex had just summited a mountain before he even called to tell me, and he would text me minutes before I had a difficult landing, somehow knowing I needed encouragement, and we joked about it. We called it the twin sense, like spider sense, but deeper, more primal. And we relied on it. We trusted it more than we trusted anything else. Alex became obsessed with the 14 8,000ers, the 14 mountains on Earth over 8,000 meters, and he spent 10 years climbing them one by one. Everest, Annapurna, Kangchenjunga, and K2 was his final mountain, the most dangerous, the most deadly, with a death rate of 1 in 4, and I begged him not to go. I said, "Alex, this one is different, this one scares me." And he said, "David, I have to finish what I started. I have to complete the 14, and I will be careful." I promised, but I had a bad feeling, a terrible feeling that I could not shake. He left for Pakistan in February, and the plan was to summit K2 in early March during a brief weather window. And we talked every few days when he had satellite connection, and he was excited, confident, saying the route looked good. The weather was holding, the team was strong, and I tried to be supportive, tried to push down the dread that kept building in my chest. But 3 days before his summit attempt, I woke up gasping like someone was pressing on my chest, and I called him immediately and said, "Alex, something is wrong, please be careful." And he said, "David, I'm always careful, stop worrying." But I could not stop worrying because the feeling was getting stronger. On March 12th, Alex and his team began their summit push, and that was the last time anyone heard from him. The weather turned violent, faster than the forecasts predicted, and an avalanche hit the route at 24,000 feet and buried 3 climbers, including Alex and the rescue coordinator, called me and said, "David, we lost contact 36 hours ago. We sent drones. We sent climbers. We found no signs of life. And given the altitude and the time elapsed, we are calling off the search, and I am so sorry." And I said, "No, you do not understand. He is alive. I can feel him." And the coordinator said gently, "David, I understand this is hard, but no one survives 36 hours buried in an avalanche at that altitude." And I said, "I am coming to get him." My family thought I was in denial, thought I was having a breakdown. My father said, "David, you have to accept this. Alex is gone," and my mother was crying, saying, "Please do not do this. Please do not risk your life on false hope." But it was not false hope. It was not denial. It was knowing the same way I knew when he broke his collarbone at 19. The same way I knew when he got engaged before he told anyone it. Was the twin sense, and it was telling me that Alex was alive and in trouble. And I had to go, and nothing anyone said was going to stop me, because leaving him there when I knew he was alive was not an option. I called every contact I had in high-altitude aviation and finally found a pilot in Nepal named Tenzing, who had a modified Pilatus PC-6 capable of landing above 20,000 feet. And I said, "I need to get to K2 base camp immediately, and then I need you to fly me as high as you can possibly go." And he said, "David, the highest anyone has ever landed. A fixed-wing aircraft is around 19,000 feet. You are talking about 25,000, maybe higher. That is the death zone. Human beings cannot survive there without oxygen, let alone fly." And I said, "I know, but my brother is up there and he is alive. And I need to try." And Tenzing was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Okay, I will take you. But we have one shot if the engine fails. If we stall, if anything goes wrong, we die up there." And I said, "I understand." I flew from Nepal to Pakistan in 8 hours and landed at Skardu, the closest airfield to K2, and I chartered a helicopter to base camp, which sits at 16,000 feet. And when I arrived, the expedition leaders looked at me like I was insane and said, "David, we appreciate that you came, but there is nothing to do. Your brother is gone." And I said, "Where exactly did the avalanche hit?" And they showed me on a map a section of the route at 24,000 feet, near a rock formation called the Bottleneck. And I studied the topography and realized there was a small plateau about 500 feet below the avalanche site, barely large enough for a stall landing if I came in at exactly the right angle with exactly the right wind. Tenzing looked at the map and shook his head and said, "David, that plateau is at 23,500 feet. I have never flown above 20,000. The air is so thin the engine will barely produce power. The wings will barely generate lift. We will be operating at the absolute edge of what is physically possible. And if we crash up there, no one can rescue us. We will die." And I said, "I know, but Alex is my brother. He is my twin, and I can feel him, and I cannot leave him." And Tenzing studied my face for a long time and finally said, "Okay, we go at dawn when the winds are calmest, but we take oxygen, we take emergency gear, and we accept that we are probably going to die." That night I could not sleep. I lay in my tent at base camp staring at the ceiling, and I focused on the connection on the twin sense. And I tried to feel Alex, tried to send him a message, tried to let him know I was coming. And I swear, I felt something back. Not words, not thoughts, but a feeling of cold and pain and desperation and hanging on, just barely hanging on. And I thought, hold on, Alex. Hold on, brother. I'm coming. Just hold on a little longer. And I do not know if he heard me, if the connection works that way, but I had to believe he did because belief was all I had left. We took off at 5:30 a.m. and the sun was just starting to light up the peaks. And K2 rose ahead of us, massive and terrifying, the second highest mountain on Earth, and far more dangerous than Everest. And Tenzing flew the Pilatus up the valley, staying low to build speed. And then we started climbing and the air got thinner and thinner and the engine started laboring. And at 18,000 feet, Tenzing said, "This is as high as I have ever been." And at 20,000 feet, the stall warning started beeping. And we were climbing at maybe 200 feet per minute, barely moving. And the mountains around us were close, too close, their peaks level with us. And I thought, we are not going to make it. The plane cannot climb high enough. But Tenzing was a master pilot. He found updrafts thermal currents rising off the rock faces, and he used them to gain altitude inch by inch. And at 22,000 feet, we were both on oxygen because the air was too thin to breathe, and my head was pounding and I felt dizzy and sick. And Tenzing said, "David, this is it, this is our ceiling. If we go higher, we will stall." And I looked at the GPS and saw we were still 1,500 feet below the plateau, and I said, "We have to try, we have to get higher." And Tenzing adjusted the mixture, leaned out the fuel, and the engine coughed, and then caught, and we climbed another 500 feet, and then another, and at 23,000 feet, the plateau came into view. It was tiny, maybe 80 feet long and 40 feet wide, perched on the side of the mountain, with a 1,000-foot drop on 3 sides and covered in snow and ice. And Tenzing said, "That is not a runway, that is a death trap." And I said, "That is where we need to land." And he looked at me and said, "Okay, but I am going to make one pass to check the surface, and if it looks unstable, we abort." And I nodded, and we descended toward the plateau, and the wind hit us a massive gust from the west, and the plane yawed hard, and Tenzing fought the controls and said, "The wind shear is insane. David, we cannot land in this." And I said, "Please, Tenzing, please try one approach." And he cursed in Nepali and said, "One approach." We came around from the south, flying at 80 knots, barely above stall speed, and the plateau rushed up at us, and Tenzing deployed full flaps and cut power. And we dropped, and the wind shoved us sideways, and he corrected, and we hit the snow hard, too hard, and bounced, and the right wing dipped, and I thought, we are going over the edge. And then the wheels caught, and we slid forward in the deep snow and stopped 20 feet from the cliff. And for 5 seconds, neither of us moved, and then Tenzing said, "We are alive. I cannot believe we are alive." And I said, "Thank you, brother. Thank you." And I grabbed the emergency pack and opened the door. The cold hit me like a physical blow, negative 40 degrees, and the wind was screaming, and I could barely breathe even with the oxygen mask, and I looked around trying to orient myself, and then I saw it 500 feet above us, a massive debris field from the avalanche, tons of snow and ice and rock, and somewhere in that mess was Alex, and I started climbing, and every step was agony. My legs felt like concrete, my lungs were burning, and at this altitude, you cannot think clearly. Your brain is dying from lack of oxygen. And I kept slipping, kept falling, but I kept climbing because Alex was up there, and I could still feel him faintly, like a candle about to go out. I reached the debris field and started digging frantically with my hands, and I was calling his name, screaming it, and the wind tore the words away, and I thought, I am too late, he is gone. I felt him, but I was wrong, and then I saw it. A small opening in the ice, a gap between 2 boulders, and I shone my headlamp inside and saw fabric, and I dug faster, tearing at the ice until I could see his jacket, and I pulled and pulled, and Alex came free, and his lips were blue, and his eyes were closed, and I thought, no, 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 and I ripped off my glove and pressed my fingers to his neck, and felt a pulse weak and slow, but there. I dragged Alex down the slope toward the plane, and he was unconscious and freezing, and I was trying to move fast, but at 23,000 feet fast is impossible. Every movement takes 10 times the effort, and my vision was tunneling, and I knew I was approaching my own limits, my own body shutting down from the altitude. But I could not stop, and Tenzing saw me coming and climbed out of the plane and helped me. And together we got Alex into the back seat. And Tenzing said, "Is he alive?" And I said, "Barely." And Tenzing said, "Then we need to go now, because if we stay up here any longer, we all die." Tenzing started the engine, and we rolled forward in the snow, and I was holding Alex, trying to warm him. And the plane picked up speed, but the snow was deep, too deep, and we were running out of plateau, and Tenzing pulled back on the yoke and nothing happened. And he said, "We are too heavy with 3 people, we do not have enough lift." And I said, "Try again," and he pulled back harder, and the plane lurched into the air 10 feet from the cliff edge, and we dropped, and my stomach went into my throat, and then the wings caught air, and we were flying. We descended as fast as we dared, and at 20,000 feet, Alex opened his eyes and looked at me and whispered. David and I started crying and said, "Yes, brother, I am here, I found you." And he said, "I knew you would, I could feel you coming." And then he passed out again. And Tenzing radioed ahead to base camp and said, "We need medical immediately, we have a survivor." And there was stunned silence on the other end. And then chaos, everyone talking at once, saying it is impossible, no one survives 36 hours buried at that altitude. And I said, "Tell them he is a fighter," and he had help. We landed at base camp and doctors were waiting. And they rushed Alex into the medical tent and started treating him for severe hypothermia, frostbite, and altitude sickness. And I collapsed outside the tent and someone gave me oxygen and hot tea, and I just sat there shaking because I had done it, I had found him. I had brought him home. And an hour later, the head doctor came out and said, "I do not understand this medically, he should be dead. 36 hours without oxygen at that altitude in an avalanche. His core temperature was 79 degrees when you brought him in. No one survives that. But he is responding to treatment and I think he is going to make it." And I said, "He is a twin. We do not give up easily." Alex spent 3 weeks in the hospital in Islamabad and another month recovering at home. And the doctors kept running tests trying to understand how he survived, and they found that he had been trapped in a small air pocket created by 2 boulders that protected him from the worst of the avalanche, and somehow that pocket had just enough air to keep him alive, but not enough oxygen to stay conscious, and he drifted in and out for 36 hours. And he said later that he kept dreaming about me, kept hearing my voice telling him to hold on, and he thought it was his brain shutting down, thought it was a hallucination. But now he knows it was real, it was the connection. The mountaineering community called it a miracle, and scientists studied our case trying to understand the twin connection. And one researcher said there are documented cases of twins experiencing simultaneous physical sensations separated by vast distances. We do not understand the mechanism, but the data is undeniable. And Alex and I were interviewed by news outlets around the world, and everyone wanted to know how I knew he was alive. And I always said the same thing. I felt him. I have felt him every day of our lives, and that day was no different except the feeling was screaming. And I listened. Alex never climbed K2 again. He said that mountain took enough from him, and he was content leaving the 14 8,000ers unfinished at 13, and he became a motivational speaker, talking about survival, about not giving up, about the bonds that connect us. And he always tells the story about how his twin brother landed a plane in the death zone and dug him out of an avalanche, because I refuse to believe he was dead, and people cry when he tells it. And afterwards they come up to us and say, "I have a sibling I have not talked to in years, and your story made me realize I need to fix that before it is too late." 5 years after the rescue, Alex and I did a tandem skydive over the Himalayas, and as we fell through the air at 15,000 feet, I looked over at him and thought about how close I came to losing him, about how everyone said he was dead, about how I landed a plane at 23,000 feet, because a feeling in my gut told me he was alive. And I thought about all the people who do not listen to those feelings, who dismiss intuition and connection as superstition, and I wondered how many brothers and sisters and twins and families have been lost because someone ignored that voice. The twin connection is real. I do not care what skeptics say. I do not care about scientific explanations or lack thereof. I know what I felt that night. I know that somehow across hundreds of miles and thousands of feet of altitude I felt my brother dying, and that feeling gave me the courage to attempt something impossible, and that feeling was right, and Alex is alive because of it, and that is proof enough for me, and every twin who has ever experienced it knows exactly what I am talking about because we live it every day. Now, when I fly rescue missions, I pay attention to intuition, to feelings that do not make logical sense. because I learned that sometimes the most important information comes not from instruments or radios, but from something deeper, something we do not have words for. And I tell every rescue pilot I train, trust your gut, trust the things you cannot explain, because logic will tell you when something is possible, but intuition will tell you when something is necessary, and sometimes necessary is more important than possible. To anyone watching this who has a sibling, a twin, a family member they have lost touch with or take for granted, I want you to imagine getting that call. Imagine hearing that they are gone, and ask yourself what you would regret not saying, not doing, and then do not wait. Do it now, because Alex and I got lucky. We got a second chance. But most people do not. And the connections we have with the people we love are the most important things in our lives, more important than careers or money or pride. And if you have someone who matters, call them, tell them, fly to them if you have to, because life is fragile and tomorrow is not guaranteed. Alex says he owes me his life, but I tell him he is wrong, because he would have done the same for me, because that is what twins do. That is what family does. We show up. We do impossible things. We land planes in death zones. We dig through avalanches. We refuse to accept loss when love is screaming that there is still hope. And that day on K2, love was screaming, and I listened, and my brother came home, and that is all that matters.